Jesus teaches you to talk to God. You're doing it wrong. Jesus ensina a falar com Deus. Você está fazendo isso errado. I've been praying, but deep down, it feels like nothing's shifting. You say the words, you follow the steps, but it's like God's not answering. That silence, that disconnect, it's not your lack of faith, it's the way you were taught. Jesus didn't just tell us to pray, he showed us how. And the way he prayed changes everything. This message will realign your voice with heaven's frequency, because prayer was never meant to be a routine, it was always meant to be a relationship. Write this phrase in the comments as a declaration of shift. I will pray the way Jesus taught, not to perform, but to connect. And if you're ready to rebuild your prayer life from the inside out, with clarity, depth, and spiritual truth, this is your space. Subscribe now and walk this journey with us. You don't have to do it alone anymore. The anatomy of prayer, dismantling the empty formula. Many people were taught to pray using memorized words, reciting them like a script. The tone is often formal, robotic, a performance more than a conversation. But Christ made it clear in the gospel, true prayer is not about impressive language, it's about authenticity. God isn't swayed by poetic lines, he listens to the soul behind the sound. You could say the most spiritual words and still be completely disconnected. That's the mistake Jesus confronted, prayer that sounds good but means nothing. Jesus exposed this kind of hollow spirituality with gentle authority. He pointed to the religious elite who prayed loudly in public, not to connect with God, but to be seen. Don't be like them, he said, and that still applies today. The wisdom here is sharp. If you're praying to impress people, you're no longer praying to God. Real spiritual depth begins where performance ends. Motivation matters more than volume. Think of a child crawling into their father's lap. No rehearsed speech, just trust. That's the posture Jesus invites us into. Whether you're whispering a psalm at night or just sighing in silence, it all counts when your heart is present. God isn't evaluating your grammar, he's listening for your truth. And truth doesn't always come in neat, articulate phrases. Sometimes it comes in tears. What's wild is that Jesus himself, fully divine, fully human, spoke to the Father with simplicity. Not elaborate, not rehearsed, just direct and intimate. If Christ didn't overcomplicate his prayers, why do we? Maybe you've been trying to sound more holy instead of being more honest. That's backwards. In prayer, inspiration doesn't come from sounding impressive, it comes from being real. Here's something practical. Before your next prayer, pause and ask yourself, why am I doing this? If the answer is anything other than connection with God, start over. Find a quiet space, turn off the noise, and just begin. Speak slowly, breathe deeply, read a short psalm like Psalm 62, and reflect on one line that stands out. Let that be your gateway to a conversation, not a monologue, not a recital, but something human, heartfelt, and holy. Now, if all of this feels foreign or unfamiliar, you're not alone. Most people were handed a script, not a guide. But Jesus didn't leave us wandering. He offered a model, a spiritual blueprint that simplifies everything, reorders our perspective, and reconnects us with what matters most. And once you see how he begins that prayer, everything else starts to fall into place. The Lord's Prayer, Christ's blueprint for spiritual alignment. There's something remarkable about how Jesus responded when the disciples said, "Teach us to pray." He didn't lecture, he didn't complicate. He delivered a spiritual framework, what we now call the Lord's Prayer. And inside that short, masterful arrangement is a reordering of everything you thought you needed: motivation, clarity, identity, alignment. This isn't a prayer to memorize and repeat mindlessly. It's a doorway into wisdom, into truth, into the presence of God himself. Notice how it begins. Our Father, not almighty ruler, not divine CEO. Jesus starts with relationship. That one word, Father, changes everything. He's drawing you into intimacy, not formality. That alone can realign your spiritual life. So pause right here. Ask yourself, when you pray, do you approach as a child or as an employee? One connects with love, the other with performance. Jesus is calling you higher, towards something that heals and empowers. Then come the priorities. Hallowed be your name, your kingdom come, your will be done. Not my goals, not my to-do list, not my preferences. Jesus is saying, begin your prayer by surrendering your control. That's not weakness, that's strength, that's inspiration in action. Because when you align with the divine will, your entire mindset shifts. You stop begging for life to change and start becoming someone who can transform it through the power of Christ working in you. Now look at the next section. Give us this day our daily bread. Jesus is telling us it's okay to ask, not with fear, not with desperation, but with trust, confidence, expectation. You're asking your Father, not a vending machine. This isn't spiritual consumerism. This is sacred dependency. And yes, that's a good thing, because when you ask with faith, believing that God knows what you need, even before you speak, you unlock provision, you activate divine rhythm, and you step into alignment. There's structure in this prayer, but not rigidity. There's rhythm, but no ritualism. Every line opens a conversation. Every phrase realigns your priorities with eternal perspective. Want to practice? Begin your day reciting the Lord's Prayer slowly, deliberately. Let each line sink into your bones, then close your eyes, breathe deeply, and personalize it. Replace our bread with your specific need. Replace forgive us with the name of someone you're struggling to release. Watch how your heart softens in the process. And just when you think you understand the structure, Jesus flips it again. Because the next part of this model prayer doesn't just shape your relationship with God, it reshapes your relationship with others. There's one word, one principle that forms the bridge between heaven and earth, and without it, prayer stalls. It locks, it loses oxygen, and unless you unlock this next dimension, your prayers will remain ideas, not encounters. Intimacy in secret. The locked room is the most spiritual place on earth. Jesus wasn't vague when he spoke of prayer. He was razor sharp. Go into your room, shut the door, pray to your Father who is unseen. That's not just instruction, that's revelation. He was separating noise from presence, spectacle from sincerity. What he's showing us is this: if you need applause to pray, you're not really praying, you're performing. And the truth is, performance can never produce spiritual power. Only intimacy can do that. That locked room, it's more than a physical space. It's a symbol. It's the inner chamber of your heart, the place where all distractions are silenced and nothing exists but you and God. In a world obsessed with visibility, Jesus turns your eyes inward. He calls you out of the spotlight and into solitude. And here's the question: when was the last time you craved that secret space? Not out of guilt, but out of desire. Because in that space, transformation begins. You don't need an altar. You don't need incense. You don't need ambient music. You need awareness. You need to be present, fully present. That's the secret ingredient in every powerful prayer. And once you're in that private place, you'll realize something. The deepest moments with God rarely happen when others are watching. They happen when the mask is off, when the ego is quiet, when the heart finally breathes. Let's get practical. Designate a space, a literal space, a chair in the corner, a closet, even a car parked in silence. That space becomes sacred not because of what it looks like, but because of what it hosts. Keep a journal nearby. Write down your thoughts before and after prayer. Read a short psalm, like Psalm 139, and let it guide your focus. You'll be surprised how clear your mind becomes when your soul isn't trying to impress anyone. And it's in that private space that the voice of God becomes unmistakable. Not loud, not dramatic, just real, just clear. Because God doesn't shout over noise, He waits for silence. That's why Jesus withdrew so often, not because He was escaping, but because He was connecting. And if Christ needed solitude to hear clearly, how much more do we? How can we expect clarity when we're always surrounded by chaos? But here's what's coming, and it's vital. When that door is closed and the noise is gone, what happens next isn't just emotional, it's structural, foundational. And everything you experience in that quiet space hinges on one massive truth. Does God really hear me? And if He does, what does that mean for the words I speak? The God who listens, dismantling the myth of a distant, distracted deity. Far too many people pray as if they're leaving voicemails for a God who doesn't check His messages. They speak, but with no expectation. They ask, but with no faith. But Jesus shattered that illusion in one clear statement: your Father knows what you need before you ask. That's not poetic, that's foundational. God hears, He knows, He cares. Prayer isn't shouting into the void, it's communion with a present, attentive Father. Think about it. If you truly believed God was listening, I mean really listening, how would your words change? How would your posture shift? Would you still rush through it? Or would your prayer become more intentional, more focused, more alive? Jesus wanted to awaken that belief in us. He wasn't just teaching prayer, He was restoring confidence. Confidence that heaven hears, confidence that Christ intercedes, confidence that we're not alone. Here's a truth you need to settle in your soul. Silence doesn't mean absence. You may not feel Him, you may not hear an audible voice, but that doesn't change reality. God is present, active, always tuned in, and faith, real faith, chooses to trust beyond the senses. That's what separates a reaction from a spiritual response. And trust me, the most powerful prayers are often whispered in moments when it feels like no one else would understand. Now, take this into your daily routine. Before you even speak a word, pause and say this: God, I know you hear me. Just that. Say it with inspiration, with expectation. Make it a declaration, not a wish. Then speak your heart. Not because you're trying to wake Him up, but because He's already listening. Want a scripture to anchor that belief? Try Psalm 34:15. The eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and His ears are attentive to their cry. Let this sink in. Prayer is not about alerting God. It's about aligning with Him. It's not a notification, it's a partnership. That shift in understanding will elevate your spiritual life instantly, because now you're not praying as a stranger. You're praying as a son, a daughter. And sons don't beg for attention. They know they have it. That's the kind of wisdom that changes not just your words, but your entire life. And this is where the mistake happens for many. They ask, but they ask from a place of fear, from scarcity, from doubt. Jesus didn't just teach us to ask, He taught us how to ask. And once you get this next principle, you'll stop treating God like a vending machine and start relating to Him like a provider, a guide, a Father who knows exactly what's needed, even when what's needed is a firm no. Asking the right way, why God is not your genie in a lamp. Some people treat prayer like it's a customer service request. Submit your order, wait for results, complain if it takes too long. But Jesus dismantled that mindset when He said, "Give us this day our daily bread." It's subtle but powerful. He's not encouraging entitlement, He's teaching trust. This isn't about demanding luxury. It's about depending on provision. Because when you see God as a provider, not a servant, your entire posture shifts. This is key. Asking is not wrong. In fact, it's encouraged. But how you ask reveals who you believe God is. If you ask like He's a distant employer, you'll keep trying to earn blessings. If you ask like He's a vending machine, you'll be furious when the wrong snack drops. But if you ask like He's your Father, present, wise, loving, then you'll ask with humility, with expectation, with peace. That's where wisdom begins to flow. Christ didn't pray for extravagance. He prayed for daily bread. In other words, what I need for today. Not tomorrow's worries, not next year's dreams, but today's grace. Today's portion. It's about learning to walk in step with God instead of sprinting ahead. Real spiritual maturity is learning to live with provision that flows one day at a time. You don't hoard faith, you receive it fresh, just like manna in the wilderness. Here's an exercise for your heart. Before you make your next request, pause and ask, why am I asking for this? Then ask, what will I do with the answer? If the answer blesses only you, dig deeper. Ask for something bigger, something that blesses others, something that multiplies. Asking well means aligning with God's vision, and that, right there, is where motivation and inspiration collide. It's no longer about your will, it's about His wisdom working through you. Let's get real. Sometimes the answer will be no, or not yet. That doesn't mean the prayer failed. It means your spirit is being trained. Delayed answers grow faith. They develop discernment. They separate the shallow from the surrendered. And if you can learn to thank God for a closed door just as much as you thank Him for an open one, then you're not just praying, you're transforming, you're becoming. But none of this works if your heart is blocked, if you're carrying resentment, bitterness, unforgiveness, because you can't expect a clear channel with God if you're holding grudges in your spirit. That's why Jesus ties asking to something far deeper, something most people avoid. And without it, your prayer life will always stay stuck at surface level. Forgiveness as access, you're not even in the conversation until you release the weight. Jesus didn't bury this in a footnote. He put it in the center of the prayer. Forgive us as we forgive. That's not a suggestion, that's a condition. He's telling you straight. If you're unwilling to release, you're unfit to receive. That's not harsh, that's spiritual alignment. You can't pour clean water into a vessel filled with poison, and bitterness, no matter how justified it feels, is still poison. Forgiveness isn't weakness, it's access. Think of it like this. Every grudge is a wall. Every unhealed offense becomes static in your connection with God. You're praying for clarity, but holding on to resentment. You're speaking words of peace while brewing storms in your heart. That's contradiction, and contradiction weakens power. Jesus knew that. That's why He refused to separate vertical relationship with God from horizontal relationships with people. They rise and fall together. It's not about pretending. It's not about forgetting. Forgiveness doesn't mean you approve of what happened. It means you won't let it define your spiritual path. Because when you carry pain, it spills into everything. Into your prayer, your posture, your purpose. Forgiveness clears the lens. It restores connection. And sometimes it takes time. But you begin by deciding. You release not because they deserve it, but because you do. You deserve peace. Want something practical? Start with a name. Just one. Write it down. Then pray this. God, I release this person into your hands. I let go of control. I choose freedom today. Say it daily, out loud. If it helps, read Psalm 51, David's cry for cleansing and mercy. Let it shape your own confession. Forgiveness is like unclogging a spiritual pipeline. Once the flow starts again, prayer becomes powerful, not in theory, but in reality. There's a reason Jesus tied this to the Lord's Prayer. He knew the human tendency to spiritualize pain, to cover wounds with holy language. But real transformation requires honesty. Honesty about what you're holding and what it's costing you. The longer you delay forgiveness, the longer you delay growth, because you can't carry offense and expect overflow. One will cancel the other. Choose wisely. And this is where it gets deeper, because when the heart is clean and the soul is surrendered, prayer stops being a transaction and starts becoming transformation. It's no longer about changing the situation. It's about changing you. That's the shift. That's the root. And unless you embrace it, the next level of prayer will always feel like a mystery just out of reach. Prayer as transformation. Stop asking to change the world if you're not willing to change yourself. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus didn't shout. He didn't command legions. He whispered, "Not my will, but yours." That moment, raw, trembling, holy, wasn't just a prayer. It was a surrender. And that's where most people hesitate. Because real prayer doesn't just ask God to fix the storm outside, it invites Him to transform the storm within. This is where motivation dies and spiritual maturity is born, right at the edge of your will. Most people don't realize it, but their prayer life is often a negotiation. God, change this, but leave me as I am. Jesus never prayed like that. He stepped into the pain. He prayed through the pressure, and he yielded completely. That's what transformation demands. You can't evolve and cling at the same time. You've got to choose comfort or calling, the cross or the shortcut. If you want to pray with power, you have to surrender with purpose. This is where a lot of believers get stuck. They're sincere, but not surrendered. They want God to change their finances, their relationships, their future, but they resist the inner work. They quote scripture, but avoid submission. Real change begins when prayer becomes a mirror, when the question shifts from "what do I want" to "who am I becoming?" Transformation is slow, costly, but it always bears fruit, and it's always worth it. Right now, pause and write this phrase in the comments below. Not for me, but as a declaration to yourself and to God. Change the world through me, but start with me. Write it. Let it seal this moment. You're not just watching content. You're stepping into alignment. That single act can be the first brick in a brand new foundation. And if this message stirred something in you, if it helped you see prayer differently, more deeply, more truthfully, then take a second and leave a like. Let it be a small act of worship, a little echo that says, "Yes, I'm here. Yes, I'm ready." That one gesture may carry more spiritual resonance than you realize. Small seeds grow big trees. Finally, if you're not already part of this space, I invite you to stay. Subscribe to the channel, not for content, but for connection, for growth, for wisdom you can revisit when life gets loud. Think of this channel as your spiritual corner, where the world quiets down and the voice of God gets clearer. Stick around. The journey is only deepening from here. Persistence without demands. Learning to stay without forcing the outcome. Jesus told a story about a widow who kept knocking on the door of an unjust judge. She didn't stop. She didn't shrink. And eventually the judge gave in, not because he cared, but because she kept showing up. Then Jesus flipped the story. If even he gave her justice, how much more will your Father? This wasn't about begging. It was about belief. Spiritual persistence isn't noisy. It's anchored. It keeps praying when nothing's changed. That's power. But here's what we miss. Persistence is not pressure. It's not about arm-twisting God. It's not spiritual blackmail. It's a posture of faith. You show up not to wear him down, but to remind yourself that he's still God. You pray again, not because he forgot, but because you remember. That's the heart of endurance. It's not desperate. It's devoted. It's rooted in the wisdom that timing belongs to Him. The danger is in confusing persistence with performance. We think if we say the right words enough times with enough emotion, then we'll make it happen. That's not prayer. That's manipulation disguised as devotion. Jesus never taught that. He taught trust. Trust that God hears the first time. Trust that if it takes time, there's a reason. Trust that delay doesn't mean denial, and that silence doesn't mean absence. Persistence isn't about repetition. It's about relationship. The more time you spend in prayer, the more your faith is formed. Your focus sharpens, your desire purifies. You begin to want what God wants, not just what you wanted at the start. You become stable, settled, anchored, not because you got what you asked for, but because you became who you were meant to be while waiting. Here's a question to sit with. Would you keep praying if you knew the answer would take years? That's where spiritual endurance is tested. That's where motivation either deepens or dissolves. Jesus modeled this kind of perseverance in the garden, in the wilderness, on the cross. He didn't stop believing when heaven was quiet. And that silence produced resurrection. The waiting has weight, and it's never wasted. What comes next isn't about doing more. It's about hearing more. Listening, not just speaking, because if you're going to persist in prayer, you need to hear clearly. And sometimes that clarity isn't found in volume, it's found in stillness. And stillness is its own kind of obedience. Prayer as listening. Stop talking so much. Let God speak. Most people think prayer is about what they say. They fill the silence with words, phrases, rituals, as if volume equates to value, but Jesus often withdrew. Alone, quiet. He wasn't escaping people. He was creating space for the voice that mattered most. If the Son of God needed stillness, what makes us think we can live without it? This isn't about eloquence, it's about awareness, the sacred art of listening. Listening is not passive, it's powerful. When your mouth closes, your spirit opens. The noise fades, and wisdom begins to rise. You don't need a booming voice from the clouds. Sometimes God whispers in the form of clarity, a sudden insight, a deep peace. A line from a psalm that won't leave your mind. That's the kind of conversation most people miss because they're too busy filling the space with noise. Let's get brutally honest. Some people pray more out of anxiety than faith. They talk to God, but they never pause long enough to let Him reply. Imagine calling someone, talking for 10 straight minutes and hanging up before they respond. That's not relationship, that's monologue. And monologue doesn't change you. Spiritual growth demands exchange, response, and that requires quiet. You want to go deeper? Start setting aside time to pray without asking for anything. Just be, just breathe. Begin with 5 minutes of silence. No music, no distractions, just attention. Then read something simple, a verse, a line from Proverbs, a piece of the gospel. Sit with it. Ask no questions. Expect nothing flashy. Just listen. You'll be amazed what rises up when your heart isn't rushing the moment. Remember this, stillness is not inactivity, it's receptivity. God often speaks when we least expect it, not through spectacle, but through stillness, through conviction, through peace that can't be explained. When you create space to listen, you honor the relationship, and suddenly prayer becomes more than expression. It becomes alignment, a sacred rhythm of speaking and receiving. And this leads us to something even more important. Because listening doesn't just happen in silence. It happens in motion. The clearest guidance often comes not before you move, but as you move. But you can't hear instructions if you're constantly interrupting. And the only way to carry that voice with you is to walk in step with it. Prayer as the way. You're not doing it wrong. You're just beginning. Let's set something straight. The greatest mistake in prayer is thinking you're failing at it. That you need to be more spiritual, more articulate, more put together before you can speak with God. That's a lie. That's pressure talking, not truth. Prayer isn't a skill to master. It's a relationship to grow. And like any real relationship, it deepens with time. You don't start perfect, you start present. Jesus didn't come to complicate communication with God. He came to make it real, accessible, alive. He didn't say, pray like the righteous. He said, come to me, all who are weary. That's the starting point. Not when you're holy, when you're honest, not when you're full of answers, when you're empty enough to be filled. That's where the journey begins. And the truth is, if you're praying at all, you're already on the path. You see, spiritual growth doesn't look like lightning bolts and dramatic moments. It looks like showing up, day after day, sometimes with tears, sometimes in silence, sometimes with questions, sometimes with psalms, but always with intention. That consistency is what shapes the soul. You don't measure your prayer life by feelings, you measure it by faith. And faith says, keep going, even when you don't feel it. So yes, you may still wonder if you're doing it right. But the question isn't about performance, it's about presence. Are you showing up? Are you seeking God even imperfectly? Are you opening your heart even when it's messy? That's what He sees. That's what moves Him. Not perfection, but pursuit. Not eloquence, but effort. And the more you lean in, the more natural it becomes. Not easier, just deeper. There's something freeing in this truth. Every conversation with God is progress. Every word, every silence, every breath. They all form a thread in the lifelong dialogue between heaven and earth. You're not behind, you're becoming. And no matter how inconsistent you've been, today is always a good day to begin again. No shame, no guilt, just alignment. Just motivation to keep walking the path Christ opened. And the beauty is, this path never ends. It expands, it deepens, it carries you through seasons, storms, and sacred moments you never saw coming, because prayer was never meant to be a moment. It was meant to be a way, a rhythm, a lifelong unfolding of presence, power, and wisdom. And now that you see it, you can start to live it. So now you know, prayer isn't performance, it's permission. It's the space where you invite God to rearrange you from the inside out. And here's the truth, it doesn't matter how many times you've gotten it wrong. What matters is what you do next. Because you don't need to be perfect to pray, you just need to be present. And if you're willing to start showing up with intention, everything can change. Ask yourself, what if you stopped chasing outcomes and started pursuing alignment? What if you shifted from requests to relationship, from noise to listening? What if you prayed less like a transaction and more like a transformation in motion? Would your spirit feel different? Would your days look different? Would your inner world begin to carry peace that doesn't even make sense on paper? Because that's what Jesus came to show us. Not just that we can pray, but that we were created to. Designed for it, destined for it, He modeled it, He lived it, and He taught it to people like you, imperfect in progress, unsure. That means you're not too late. You're not too far off. You're right on time if you decide to begin. Not eventually, now. So here's the challenge. Don't let this be another thing you heard and forgot. Take one idea from this message, one truth, one insight, one shift, and apply it today. Start small, make space, set your heart. Talk to God like He's near, because He is. And if you need help starting, start by saying, Father, I'm here. Teach me to hear you. That one sentence can open a door you didn't even know was locked. And before you go, pause with purpose. Ask yourself, what if this is the moment that changes everything? Not because of emotion, but because of execution. What if this is your spiritual turning point? Not a sermon, but a stake in the ground. Because moments like this, They don't repeat themselves, but they do ripple forward if you choose to respond. If this spoke to your spirit, if it shook something loose inside, subscribe now. Stay connected. Don't walk this road alone. There's more to be uncovered, more to be learned, more wisdom to receive. And if you're serious about growing, about hearing clearly, about walking closer with Christ, then this is the space. This is your signal. This is your invitation to stay in motion and never stop building.